Hey guys, One here. Welcome back to another video, and today we're here with Lionel 6-18375, this Lackawanna FM Trainmaster, and this is the newest member of my fleet, so to commemorate the occasion, we're going to be repainting it from this beautiful Lackawanna 850 into Reading 801. So a little bit of backstory is in order here before I get started on this. The Reading company took delivery in 1953 of 4 FM Trainmasters, 800, 801, 860, and 861. 800 and 801 were Phase 1 freight variants of the FM Trainmaster. 860 and 861 were Phase 1 passenger variants of the FM Trainmaster. All of them were long hood forward. In 1956, as far as I can tell, all of those units were converted to Phase 2, which is what all of the second and, I believe, third order of FM Trainmasters were. At the same time, they were also converted to be short hood forward. So I am going to be specifically modeling the 801 as it appeared in 1953 when it was delivered to the Reading. That means that I need to take this beautiful example of a Phase 2 passenger type FM Trainmaster and convert it into a Phase 1, ideally freight variant, but the details there are a little easier to fudge, so it may just be a Phase 1 passenger with the freight numbering. So we'll see when we get there. But that's the overall plan. So without further ado, let's get started. So what are the main spotting differences between a Phase 1 and a Phase 2 FM Trainmaster? Well, here we have a Phase 2, so we'll start there. The Phase 2s had these louvers all the way down the side, and they had a thicker cross brace here for these exhaust fans. The Phase 1s didn't have these vents all the way down to the last two, and these last two vents were 5 louver vents instead of the 6 louver vents as modeled here. So the first step, I already went ahead and pried these off with an X-Acto blade. It's theoretically held in with 8 pins, but they're glued in, so you kind of have to just poke and prod and pry until it comes off. But anyway. The other difference between what my model is and what the actual one would have been are these little vents up here, as far as I can tell. These are the vents for the steam generator, which is what makes this a passenger variant. The passenger variants needed steam generators in order to supply steam heat to the passenger cars that it was pulling. So that means it also had steam lines on the pilot, but I'm not going to worry about that, and I think I'm just going to leave those vents there because they look nice, and there's really no reason for me to remove it. If I ever decide that I don't use this engine for freight enough, and I would rather use it for passenger for an operating session or whatever, I can strip off the 801 decals, and I can do 860 or 861, both of which were Phase 1 passenger variants. So that's the idea. To get started here, I'm going to sand off the 5 louvers, or I guess these 5 louvers, and I'm going to try to remove the top louver on these last 2 vents here. That will make it look like the reference photos that I have, and then once I've done that, I can start attacking this thing with Paint Stripper. I haven't played with Paint Stripper yet. This is going to be the first time I've ever used it, so hopefully all goes well, but you and me are going to find out together how that goes. So I got one of them done here, done as in it's down to the filler. I'm going to show you guys how I did this, because hopefully it'll turn out nice. I still need to hit this with the 1500 grit, but right now, let's start attacking this guy. So I did flip them around from their factory configuration, so this one, which would normally sit on the side that's closer to me right now of the locomotive, is now going to be facing the other way. The reason for that is because these louvers are a little bit closer to the rear fan housing, which is more accurate to the prototype. So anyway, the first step here, apart from figuring out which ones you want to save, I've got a flat blade X-Acto here, and I'm just going to start sliding up. I've found going bottom to top is definitely a better way of doing it. Actually, first I'm going to remove these nubs on the back because they aren't going to serve me any good apart from to make my surface uneven to sand and cut on. So Now I can go up from the bottom of the louvers and just kind of wiggling the knife back and forth, it will pop up all 6 louvers. Try not to dig down, just go straight across. You also, very conveniently, will get to keep these in case you decide you want to add louvers to another project at some point. Reuse, reduce, recycle. Anyway, so let's do that. All the way down the line here. Now that I've got that, we're going to go across the top here and just slice off this top louver. Again, trying to go across and not down. If you go down, no biggie. You're going to be filling this thing with filler anyway, so if you make a divot in it, oh well. It just makes your life a little bit easier. You won't need to use as much filler. So I'm just going to scrape off as much of the top layer as I can, because you're not going to be able to get it perfectly flush with the X-Acto, but you can get it pretty close. So I'm just going to go around here and try and get it as nice as I can and as flush to the lower plastic as possible. And that'll just make my life a little bit easier when it comes to sanding. Now when I'm doing this, as much as it looks like I'm pushing down, I am only putting a small amount of pressure on the blade downward. I'm mostly letting the blade chisel away layer by layer the plastic until it hits the lower deck here. So a lot of it is horizontal motion. So that looks pretty good to me. It is a mirror image, so that will work. So now we're going to start with the body filler. This is where stuff starts to get messy, so just be warned. I'm using this Evercoat Body Shop plastic metal. This worked really well on my Reading Camelback. It didn't absorb any of the paint, and it resulted in a really nice finish. So I'm going to try using it again here. I also used this on that New Haven gondola that I made, and that turned out really nicely too. So I'm just going to lay down a layer of it here. Doesn't really have to look pretty. And then I'm just going to, with a putty knife, just spread it all the way down. I'm doing this over a paper towel for reasons that you'll see in a second. The second I go to try to pick this up, a lot of the filler is stuck to whatever surface you apply it on. And a lot of it will not come back up with your part. So that was actually pretty decent. That worked a lot better than the first time I did it. Now I'm going to get my X-Acto out here again, and I'm going to just pick away at some of this extra filler. By the way, you don't have to use this stuff. There's like 18 million different types of plastic putty that you can get. Tamiya, I think, makes a pretty decent one from the reviews I was reading, but I haven't tried it out, so I can't give you a first-hand recommendation on that one. I usually try and go a little outside the box, we'll say, and try out stuff that really isn't made for like model making, which is how I ended up with this body shop stuff for automotive applications. This stuff is meant for metal body panels, not plastic models, but it works really well, so I cannot complain. But the one thing I can tell you right away to not use is spackle. I originally used that on my Reading Camelback, and if you've seen that video, you'll know that did not end very well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch that video. I know it's long, but like, there's a lot of valuable lessons that I learned in there. So, okay. I think I've chiseled out most of the filler that I don't want. Just realized you guys probably can't see what the hell I'm doing. So with that, let's clean off my top edge here. Let's put the knife back in its sheath so I don't stab myself. Clean off the edge, and You can see that there's still some cavities in there. It's not perfectly smooth, so let's do the same process again, this time trying to be a little bit neater. Don't need as much this time around, and it won't stick to the paper towel as much as the first coat did. So you can see there, I just coated it in and it peeled right up, so no issues there. Do be careful when you're on the back. I accidentally poked holes in that one the first time I did it, so it takes a little bit of trial and error, but that's why I always do the first one off camera, so that I can mess it up and learn, so that when I show you guys I have somewhat figured it out. So at this point it's pretty close. Obviously this will need to be sanded, but you can still see there's a couple more pinholes, so let's get back in and fill in those last pinholes. This stuff does harden very quickly, so I don't have to like sit here and wait 20 minutes for it to dry. When I first started using this stuff, I was waiting for the full hour-and-a-half cure, and that was just dumb, because this stuff hardens in like a minute tops. So to get the two louvers that are on the top, I'm going to first of all remove a bunch of this excess, because this is just going to get in the way. I'm going to put a little bit on the corner of my putty knife here, preferably a bit that isn't hardened, like that. And I'm just going to take the corner and I'm going to try my best to get as much of that filler as I can inside of that louver. So I think that one, it looks like there's a hole. There's not. It's just the way the light is reflecting off of it. So I think that one's pretty decent. So let's try and do the other one. That one I think turned out a little bit better. It is also worth noting that once body filler or whatever filler you're using starts to cure, just stop playing with it. It will start to get very sticky when you're playing with it with the putty knife, and at that point, if you continue to try to manipulate it, it will just peel up and it'll crumble and it won't look good, and you're just adding work later. Ask me how I know, but I think that should be pretty good to start sanding. I know it looks pretty ugly right now, but it will eventually end up like this. First thing I'm going to do, and also this is a pretty smooth surface. First thing I'm going to do is hit this with some 400. I'm just going to wet sand it with some 400. And then I'm going to come back through and sand it with some 1500 grit that I have, just to try to finish up the surface, knock down any of these extra edges, and also remove. The main thing that you use higher grits like that for is to remove the scratch marks from higher grits, or lower grits, sorry, so that you're not seeing all the scratches and whatnot from the 400 grit that I'm using. So let me do that, and I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's done. And there we go. That's what they look like. So this is the one that we just did together. Yeah, I probably could have gone down a little bit more if I really wanted to. You should probably be getting down to this level where you can see this plastic all the way through, but it's good enough. It's smooth to the touch, which is what matters. So when I paint it, you won't be able to see a bunch of these contours like you can currently. So that's going to be this step done. So now I'm going to jump over and start working on the actual locomotive shell itself. I've looked over this engine like nose to tail so many times, and I still find new details. These grills, if you look through them at the right angle, you can see there's stuff behind them. Those are the sloped panels that you can actually see on the prototype. If you look at prototype photos, you can see through those grates, and you can see that there are slanted panels behind them. And they actually modeled that in. So that's insane. I don't know who designed this engine, who at Lionel designed it, but whoever it was, I commend you for your effort. The detail on this thing is so nice, and just the attention to every single little bit of this model is just astounding. So kudos to you, whoever designed this thing. Alright, so I just went around and taped off everything that needs to be taped off. So the headlights, the markers, the cab windows, and then obviously the same on the other side. I am leaving the number boards uncovered for right now because I'm just going to come back and repaint them later, so I'm not too worried if those get painted over. So I took some photos as well of where everything is. Oh, I got to remember to do the builder's plates. I took some photos of where some of the decals are because I used them on my sheet. But once I get these builder plates taped off, I can start attacking this thing with some paint stripper and see what that looks like. So here's your before and your after. And yeah, I'm gonna say that this is a skill issue and not necessarily anything wrong with the product. All the spots that you see are areas that I missed with the isopropyl alcohol. I got this stuff, this strip magic, because it's supposed to be able to more carefully let you pick what you're removing and whatnot. The problem is if you miss a single spot, you get these. And these look way worse on the camera than they do in person. But like, yeah, I don't, that's kind of wild. I could probably just soak this thing in this stuff and let it sit. The problem is to deactivate it, you need to hit it with isopropyl alcohol, not just water. And that's what creates a lot of these issues. I can't feel any of these with my finger, which is good. Again, the camera makes it look way worse than it is. But yeah, this is, if this was a water-based like paint stripper where I could just rinse the thing off, it would probably look a lot better. But for right now, I'm going to say that I don't have the knowledge to use this stuff, and this is sort of a failed experiment. So I'm just going to go bomb this thing with some primer. There's some of that water and isopropyl alcohol I was using. I'm going to first dry this thing off, and then I'm going to bomb this thing with some black primer, and hopefully that hides most of the imperfections here. But holy cow, yeah, I've got a lot to learn there. This stuff is also not intended for large surfaces. It's very difficult to strip paint off of a big surface. So I had originally started by trying to remove everything. You can see I did a little test piece down here and it worked just fine. And then I started trying to get into some of the more intricate stuff. But once I realized that that's just way beyond the scope of what I want to do, I started just targeting the yellow lines, figuring that those would stand out a little bit. But at this point, I think if they stand out a little bit, that's fine. I'll find some other way to hide it because, yeah, I don't want to repeat that. So, anyway, there you go. That's why I record this stuff, by the way. I am by no means an expert. I am learning probably with most of you guys. So, failed experiment, but maybe I can try it with some smaller models. Maybe some rolling stock or something like that before I attempt to do another locomotive repaint with it. But for right now, let's just hit it with some black and see what it looks like. So I painted the whole model in this flat black primer, and yeah, you really can't see any of the damage caused by the paint stripper. But also, fun fact, you didn't need to use the paint stripper because you can't really see many of the lines. I mean, you kind of can. There you go. That particular angle, you can see the line. And it's not present on this side. I mean, it's kind of present on this side. But regardless, this model is now ready for the Pullman green paint. But before I do that, I need to fix these. So you can see here that the filler sort of sunk in a little bit. This is a common thing that a lot of fillers do. So no big deal. I'm just going to have to top it off again and sand it down, and maybe do that 3 or 4 times, letting it fully cure so that it can sink in as much as it's going to sink in. So I'm going to do that first, but I think that's going to be a either tomorrow or later problem, because at least with it like this, I can go to bed because I'm tired, and I definitely could not have with all the paint just slowly melting itself off of the body. So this is where we're going to leave it for now, and I'll see you guys when I pick this up again. Okay, so I'm switching to photos here for a second, so we'll see how this goes. Up first here, I have the louvers after I applied the second coat of filler and then painted them. And while there's still a little bit of shrinkage that you can see, it is a lot better than the first pass I did, and it was good enough that I was ready to go ahead and mount them onto the shell, which you can see here. So again, as I mentioned previously, I set it up so that the louvers would be closer to the fans on the front of the locomotive, or I guess the long hood, and that's just more accurate to what the Phase 1 Trainmasters are. So then as I was looking at it, I noticed that the horn was wrong. The Reading did this thing where they embedded the horn on the short hood into the end of the short hood above the headlight. I don't know if other roads did this, I know the Reading did, and I wanted to duplicate that feature. Now, the headlights are wrong on both ends of this locomotive, their position, but I figured I could still add the horn detail and it would look good enough. So I went to go cut off the horn and realized that it is not actually plastic. It has a brass core in it, so I had to break out my wire cutters in order to snip it off the shell. I then, while I had the cutters out, just cut the horn in half to get rid of the back metal plate that they have casted in there, because all I need is the conical trumpet end. So with that cut in half, and it was already painted from when I did the primer, I needed to drill the hole to mount it in. So I took an X-Acto blade and I kind of etched a mark that I was going to drill out originally, and then as I was playing with the knife, I realized that I could just spin the knife in a circle, and it drilled right through the plastic and gave it a nice countersink. So when I dropped the horn in, it fit perfectly. It matched the prototype exactly the way that I wanted to, and I was incredibly happy with it. So I could move on to the next Reading spotting feature, we'll say. The Reading put these rain gutters on most, if not all, of the diesel locomotives that they operated. It's one of the spotting features that some of us Reading fans use to identify Reading or ex-Reading engines. So what I did to make them here in O-scale was I used this styrene angle, this 0.060 inch or 1.5 mil. It worked really well. I think I maybe could have gone a little bit smaller, but you'll see in a second here. To size it out, I originally cut it to just be the length of the cab, figuring that when I folded it, it would sort of shrink enough. I realized that was not the case, so I cut off about an extra 1/4 inch from whatever that was. And then I snipped only one end, or like the one leg, I guess, or one of the sides of the angle, so that it would fold around the vertical wall. And that's what creates this V shape that you can see here. So I applied that on both sides and got it to about the position that looked right, and figured I could patch up some of the weird gaps with paint. So with them installed on both ends and symmetrical, I went ahead and painted I painted the cab again with a black primer, and then I painted the whole locomotive in this Pullman green. This is by Scale Coat. It turned out great. It's a absolutely fantastic paint. It's pre-thinned, like ready to just basically go into the airbrush. It took a long time to paint this thing. I lost count of the number of coats I was doing at like 7 or 8, because at that point I was just like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep applying paint until it looks good. So yeah. But yeah, so after a whole bunch of coats, I finally got a nice even coverage. The paint does come out sort of a semi-gloss. It's not exactly flat, but I don't know if it's bright enough to call it a satin. But at that point, the model was ready for the next steps, which I started recording for again. So let's get into that. So I just finished going around and hand painting everything that needed to be hand painted. So got the handrails up front, the whatever that lower grab bar is. That's the same on both sides. I'm going to leave the little chains in this green just because when you look at prototype photos, most of the time these aren't shiny silver like they are down here. These I'm just not going to touch because they'll get hit with the weathering. I also went through on the frame here and I painted the yellow on the backs of the suicide steps. I also covered up the yellow stripes on the second and third step here, per the prototype photo I'm looking at, and I filled in the gray that was on the inside of the steps. So with that, I believe all the hand painting is done, which means that I can now go through and start putting all the decals on, which is going to be fun. So let's go ahead and do that. Well, that looks pretty decent. They're still drying, so there's still a little bit of sheen left. I haven't done the micro sol coat yet. I'm using the same process that I usually use. You gloss coat it, put down the micro set, lay down your decal, and then cover it in micro sol, and then I'm going to come over it with a matte varnish or flat clear to make them blend right in. So overall, I'm really happy with this. I was a little worried when I first started cutting them out and looking at them because it didn't look that high resolution on the actual paper, but the second you actually lay them down on paint, they look really nice. So this side is done and the other side is done with the exception of the emergency fuel cutoff decal, which I'm going to need to have it mounted on the frame in order to locate that correctly because it needs to go directly above where the actual cutoff switch is. But yeah, overall, very happy with it. So now I'm going to do the ends, which by the way I did forget. I needed to hand paint the number boards black. But yeah, on the ends I'm going to need to do the safety is your job. I'm going to need the number board numbers and the number that goes at the base of the nose that the Redding did. So once these are dry enough that I can put down the microsol and then let that dry and handle it, then I'll start on the car ends. Alright, so all the decals on the sides are done, as well as the ends of the car body here. So overall, I'm incredibly happy with how these turned out. Highball Graphics did an excellent job on all the really small font. The guy was telling me that he does a lot of decals for HO and N, so I shouldn't really have to worry about small decals for O scale. And he was totally correct. The clarity is really good on every decal that I had him print. So he does say on his website a lot about be careful with the decals because they're printed on top of the filament instead of underneath like a traditional decal is. And yes, you do have to be more careful with them, but honestly, I don't think he gives himself enough credit for how durable his decals are. I was just using traditional methods that I use to align decals that normally don't have the printing on top of the clear film, and I didn't really have any issues at all with the letters coming off or the paint chipping. So it is definitely doable. If you're not careful with your tweezers or whatever you're using to align it, you can easily scratch it off. But if you're, just a little bit mindful about what you're doing, you guys shouldn't have a problem. So anyway, the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to blast this whole thing with a flat clear, as well as the frame, and get it ready for weathering. Okay, so the flat clear is now done. So now we get to do weathering, and because this engine is being modeled as it was in 1953, the year it was delivered, it's really not going to have that much grime on it. It's basically a brand new locomotive, which means I'm going to go really lightly with like maybe some exhaust soot, some light grime, some light sand, but overall it's really going to look like how it looks right now. So let's get into it here, and let's see what I do. So there you go. Pretty light weathering, like I said. I think it looks believable that it's only been in service for a couple months, but you know, there aren't very many prototype photos of brand new or almost brand new FM Trainmasters on the Reading, so I think this is what it would look like, and I'm happy with it, so that's what matters. Highlights here on the Pilot, it's a mixture of black gray, which is what I use for grime, earth brown, and some sand yellow, as well as some rust on the couplers, I think it's light rust is the actual color name. It's the same thing on both ends, just done a little bit differently because, you know, that's how airbrushing works. The trucks are basically just grime with a little bit of earth brown. That's pretty much all that is. And then intermixed around is a little bit of streaking and soot. So up top here I tried to emulate the exhaust soot running down the long hood. You really can't see it, but there are some very faint black stripes that go all the way down. So overall, I think it looks pretty good. I'm very happy with it. I think for a brand new locomotive, it looks really nice. And tomorrow I get to run it on the club layout and get some running shots for you guys.
How you doing? Not bad for one guy. My friend. Gas powered ones, rim gas, all over. The mechanic at work was asking this kid to do it with. Ronnie had 3 of them. And so I was there in the morning. He pulls out this big coat with all of them in it. And Brendan's in the case like, yeah, I'll buy it. So what do you want? He's like, $300. And Brendan's like, one of these is over 300. He goes, dude, I play them forever. He goes, they're for your. So if you go into Lackawanna, there are a whole bunch of old villas that have been redone apartments.
So there you have it. That is my repaint of this FM Trainmaster from Lackawanna 850 to Reading 801. And overall, I'm incredibly happy with how this turned out, from the super fine detail in the decals to the paint that looks decent enough, and the weathering that I think is a nice level for the era that I am going for. Obviously, there's a couple things that aren't exactly correct about it. the headlight position on both of the hoods is wrong, mainly, and then I kept the vents on top of the short hood that are for the steam generator. Also, I don't know if the dynamics in those, I think it's at the front 3 louvers closest to the cab. I think that's where the dynamic brakes are held, and on all the reference photos I have, that whole panel is like pulled out a decent amount. I don't have that replicated, obviously, but I'm not entirely sure if that's what they're for either, so I think this looks just fine. Also, all the hand-painted railings look really good. When I was running this at the club layout, a lot of people really liked it. I had a couple of the other club members tell me that it looks like a factory paint job, which is a really nice compliment. And yeah, it's definitely got some work that needs to get done on it still to patch up some flaws, but for right now, I'm very happy with this. And it can either go up on display or go back in the box and into the storage unit with the rest of the trains. But I haven't figured out exactly what I'm going to be doing with it yet. But anyway, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something from this. A lot of fun doing this project, and I hope that maybe you guys can take some of the techniques that I showed in this video and maybe apply it to your own projects, or this will serve as some motivation for you to get working on something that you've had pending for a while. But yeah, hope you all enjoyed. I'm CW Hollow 1, and have a good day, or maybe good night in your case. See ya.